Welcome to Learn Tips for Taking Teams to the Next Level Part 1 course. My name is Carol and I will be your tour guide for the session. Learn Tips for Taking Teams to the Next Level is a two-part series. Today's session is part 1 and we will be walking through the strategies to determine a best approach for work groups and teams and then how to design and set up that work group for optimal workspace. Part 2 is a deep dive into the tactical tips and tricks to use teams efficiently and effectively in terms of organizing your work and managing your communications. After today's session, you will be able to determine the best team's approach for your work group or project, such as a group chat setup or a team and channel setup. You will be able to create a workspace for your team, use a personal team to increase your own personal productivity, and determine team's best practices. Step 1. Let's talk about how to assess your team. First, you will want to ask these questions. Make sure you include your entire team in this process. Think about, what does your team do? Do you have core attributes that need to be considered? Does your team have obstacles to good collaboration? If so, what are those? And finally, what does your team need to be successful? Let's take a deeper look into each of these questions. Let's start with, what kind of team do you have? There are so many possibilities. You could have a project team with a beginning and an end, or an ongoing process team, like an operational team. There are program management teams, event planning, social networking, and maybe just an informational team. Maybe your organization is going through a big change and they need a place to be able to push out what next steps are happening. You may think of even more types based on how your organization operates. Next, you will want to document, what are the core attributes of your team. Do you have many different departments involved? Is your team global? Or do they work against deadlines? Or maybe a rolling deadline? Maybe you have a lot of moving parts like budgeting and scheduling. Or maybe you have processes that depend on other processes. Then you'll want to take a look at, what obstacles does your team face today when they're working together, so that you can create a workspace that considers that situation. For example, do they collaborate on content and have issues with managing the version control? Or do they have lots of branching conversations and chats and lack team visibility? Do they tend to work in silos or have a hard time connecting because of time zones? You can address these issues when you set up their workspace. Finally, what does your team need to succeed? Are there specific applications they use to plan or budget? Do they use a particular connection application like Yammer or Bing? Do they need praise and inspiration to keep the program on track? Or do they require a central workspace for collaboration and team alignment? This information will help you to define a robust workspace for your team. Before we get started into the implementation phase, let's talk about some benefits and considerations. So the benefits of using teams can include providing team transparency, staying organized and centralized throughout a team's life cycle, and just being able to stay in sync and on track. But there are always considerations with a new process. Employees might become overwhelmed if they have too many teams or too many chats to start with. Go slow. You can always add later. And when you create a team, channels can sometimes get out of hand. Consider channels specifically for a specific process or workspace for a specific group of people who need that workspace. Just a quick recap. Make sure you consider these questions to start. What does your team do? What are the core attributes of your team? If your team exists today, what challenges do they encounter? What are the requirements for your team to succeed? Include your entire team and possibly consider additional questions that might be relevant for your company culture or industry. Let's talk about implementation next. To do that, we're going to walk through a few scenarios to help us see how this might work. In this scenario, we have a team working on a couple of deliverables. They ultimately need a client presentation and a statement of work. There are 5 team members, and each one has a different role to contribute to the deliverable. They live in various time zone across the globe, and they only have 2 months to get ready for this RFP. Finally, they have some specific research and data they need to review and incorporate into the presentation. So what do you think? Is it a team and channel environment or a chat and meeting? In this case, we created a chat with an associated meeting. This scenario could have been a team and channel, but considering the lack of complexity to the team, only two deliverables, only five people who don't need specific workspace for their roles, it might have been overkill. If your organization is large, say 100,000 people, then creating a team and channel for a simple small project might offer a trend of creating lots of teams and channels and overwhelming your employees. If your organization has 50 people in it and five of them are on this team, then a team and channel might be more warranted. As you can see, this is not a science. It definitely depends on your organization's current alignment, culture, and processes. Let's check out how this work group looks in teams. All right, we're going to move over to chats here. So we have a group chat here called the refrigerators. Grady was the lead on this group. And as you can see, he set up this team to have all five participants in here so they have a collaborative workspace. And he did go ahead and greet everybody. And he added this poly application. He just likes to have a little bit of fun. As you can see, he named the team the refrigerators. That's because he's pitching to an appliance factory manufacturing team or manufacturing organization. So what he did is he named his team for two reasons. One, his practical reason is this is only a 2 month group. And so when he's done, he'll hide this team. But if a year from now, or 3 months from now, or 6 months, if he finds himself getting ready to pitch to another appliance manufacturing company or something in a similar industry, he may want to go find this group chat and lift some of that content from the previous work and put in his new work so he doesn't have to do any rework, right? So that's his practical application. But the fun reason why is because it can build some camaraderie. So what he did is he used the Poly application to just do some crowdsourcing. He greeted everybody. He put this out there. So you can see his idea was washer and dryer. That didn't fly. Looks like Patty's idea of the refrigerators is the one that took off. And then he continued to build out their workspace with a shell of the two deliverables. So we have the statement of work, it's a blank one, and then we have this using teams in the appliance industry. So he's put some information in there, but it's mostly a shell. And then they've started their conversation and started working together. Now, Grady went at the extra mile. They could, of course, access that content right here, but he went ahead and added everything to the tab line to make it convenient and easy. So he has the deck here. Everybody can access this deck from the tab line and make changes in it simultaneously. Same with the statement of work. Also added that to the tab line because it's one of their deliverables. Then he added this website. This is just a trends website where he can get that industry data that will help his team build a pitch that is informative and relevant to their client. All right. So he also created a meeting here. You could tell it's a meeting as a purple icon like this. He called it the refrigerators. It's reoccurring. We know that because it has the circle icon at the end. Here's your meeting details here. It's a more meeting details here. You can join from here. So this is all nice and contained. So as you can see, they've had several meetings. They've recorded it. That sort of helps with that global time zone issue. If you have people, there's not a good time for all five of them to meet because of the of how many time zones they're working between, then a recorded session is the next best possibility. So somebody can come in here, they can just click right on it, watch the recording, find out what happened in the meeting, look at the meeting notes, look at the files, and even type, add some chats in here. Hey, I watched the meeting and I have these questions. Now you'll notice that he Grady shared the exact same documents here. So you might be wondering, uh-oh, are we going to have a version issue, right? But we won't. And the reason why is because Grady shared these in the group chat and he shared them in the meeting. And since he was the one that shared them, what's unique about Teams is that in chats and meetings, when you share something, it's actually sourced from the OneDrive of the person who shared it. So as long as the same person shared it, whether you access this file in the meeting or you access it in the group chat, all the changes are going to save to the same source on Grady's OneDrive. So that's pretty nifty. Doesn't matter where you are, you don't have to jump around to try to find the document you're working on. All right, let's go back to our deck. Let's go to our next scenario. In scenario two, so this is an operational team. They are managing global delivery for their instructor-led and virtual instructor-led classroom. So it's either they've got classroom training that's instructor-led and virtual training that's instructor-led, and they're managing that um, in a global scenario. So they have 80 people on this team, plus they have the training managers that come in and make requests for their new virtual session or their new classroom session. They manage 6 processes across 5 different departments. Each team has between 10 to 25 people. It seems a little bit more complicated so far, huh, than the last one. They work across many different time zones. This is an ongoing internal process for their organization, and they use multiple applications to manage their processes. Some of them are Microsoft applications, and some are not. So, what do you think? Do you think this is a team and channel or a chat and meeting workspace? It's a team. This one's pretty definitely a team. There's a lot of complexity in this group. I suppose you could create a well-designed chat for them, but the complexity being performed here seems to align better to a team and channel environment. Like I said, this isn't a science and it will be adopted to your organization in its own way, but let's see how it plays out in teams. All right, so we're going to move from chats to teams. And we're going to go to this learn and development delivery team. Here we go. So they have a general channel. Every team you create has a general channel. And they did lock this down. It's for announcements only because general channels tend to invite general conversation. It kind of becomes the everything but the kitchen sink kind of situation. They added a kudos channel so they have a place to celebrate their milestones and do a high five. And then they have their first processes. So they kept their processes in order by using the numbering system. And the first process is a new request form. So training managers can come in here, fill out the new request form for either, they're using a forms application here for either their virtual session or series or their classroom session or series. And then process 2.A is for the classroom management team. So they have a weekly meeting here. And you can see that they have a meetings note tab that comes in automatically because they created that weekly meeting. And then they're using a planner application to manage their classroom logistics. So you can see they have 4 classes going on right now. They have a learn tips and tricks for teams. They have a brand management guideline course. They have a project management 101 course, and they have a lean strategy course. And so they've got several processes across the top here. This is their to-do list. And then so they have their learning management system entry they have to make. They have marketing they have to do for email blast and social media. They have event space that they have to lock down. And then they have their food and beverage they have to order and materials and assessments they have to send out. Then we have the second process, the 2.B. And here it's the same thing. They have a weekly meeting, so they have their meeting notes. They also set up their session, their planning in a planner application. So they've got 3 courses going on. They have a quarterly earnings learning session and a human resources monthly learning session and a finance monthly spotlight series. And they have at least these 3 processes: their learning management setup, their marketing, and their materials. They've added in a calendar. I believe the classroom management also had this. So this is just their working calendar. It's ongoing. And then they have a faculty procurement process. And this is also in a planner application. They don't have a weekly meeting because it's assigned and they they get their piece done and they can see it all from here. So they have their human resources monthly learning. Looks like Alex is working on that. He's going to have to schedule faculty for it, send them a prep kit, and then set up a prep session. with them, right? So they'll do that for every course. And then finally, they have their certification, evaluation, and reporting area. So far they have their form set up for their level 1 SMILE survey, but they will need to set more up. They'll need more applications in order to build out their certification piece and their full evaluation, and finally their reporting piece. What's nice about this is that training manager can come in and make the request, and then kind of like a, you've seen this with like pizza delivery places or something, they can kind of walk through and see where their class is as far as delivery is concerned. So they can walk through each of these processes because they use the channel to define the processes. So that's a pretty neat way of doing that. Let's go back to our deck. So we have one more scenario, scenario 3. So this is an event planning team. They all are in the same time zone. So this is for their local work community. They do an event every quarter for their local work community. They have a lot of attendees, 1,000 people, and they have a lot going on at each event. They have keynote speakers, breakout sessions, award ceremonies, kind of like a funny award ceremonies. They do some audience polling for entertainment. They have food and beverages for lunch, um, break, and then finally they have a happy hour that they do as well. Um, they this is a plus run one project, so they're all volunteering to make sure their community has an opportunity to interact and network. They use a lot of files and applications to make sure this event is well planned each quarter. What do you think? Is it a team and channel or is it a workspace? It's a team. We decided on a team and channel setup because of the rolling deadlines. So this could have been handled in a chat and meeting setup, but the use of Planner made the project much easier to use and Planner's more applicable in the team and channel environment. So let's see how they're working in this team. So in this case, we set them up as the community quarterly event planning team. And of course they have their general channel. There's only 5 of them, so they don't really use that channel. But what they did is they set up, since the rolling deadline is the hardest part for them to manage, they set this up based on time. So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And they put the numbers first in order to keep it in order. And each one in Q1, you have a planner application to plan for Q2 and a OneNote application to check off the list of things that you have to finish for executing your Q1 event. And then in Q2, they have a planner application for planning Q3, and they have a OneNote application for checking off the things you need to do to get the Q2 event up and running, right? And so on and so forth. And they just keep these channels working and running. They have an ongoing management system. So that was pretty neat. All right, so there's a lot of reasons to choose one setup over another. Remember to be conscientious of employees having too many teams and channels or chats to work in. Engage your employees on their experience. Learn about what is working for them and what is not working for them. Make adjustments, tweak, and then check in again. Like anything new and cool, if it's not tweaked and managed, it can become difficult to work within. Having an agile and continuous improvement mindset, that will help. So far, we have assessed your team. We have considered the workspace for your team. And now we need to set up and manage that team. This is really where we refine the workspace to what the work group needs. This phase may not happen until the work group is underway. Once working together, stopping to define what is missing, applications, connectors, maybe even people and other resources, will give you a chance to realign and adjust before you're too far down the road. Again, that agile and continuous improvement mindset when working on a new and flexible communication tool will serve you best in terms of efficiency and effectiveness and the overall experience for the users. What else might your team need? Do they need to set up a team meeting? Maybe they need to have the meeting more frequently or less frequently than they have it set up today. Maybe they need connectors or different or more applications. As the team moves through different phases of their processes, their needs might change. How can we anticipate that and ready the workspace for them? All right, so in scenario 1, remember this was the sales group, right? And so they had set up a group chat and they had a regular scheduled meeting with the recordings. They had their deliverable files set up on the tab line, and they also had a link to data that they could get to. But maybe we could add in some other industry links to help them, or maybe a connector of some kind that gives them more regular information on what they're reporting on. Maybe they needed over time, maybe what they're using needs to change because as they progress, right, through their project. And we remember scenario two. So this was an operational team, and they had their intake forms set up and they had their event planning processes managed pretty well. But it looked like their last process there, the evaluation and reporting and certification team, they probably needed to add in a few more forms applications for their different kinds of surveys, so different kinds of evaluations they need, because they have 4 levels in training. And then they probably need something to manage a certification process, right? And then they probably need a Power BI application to manage the report out of that certification and evaluation so they are ready to do remediation as needed to their training. So they had quite a bit more to work on. And then finally, in scenario three, so they had a scheduled meeting, right? This was the event planning folks that all lived in the same place. They had a scheduled meeting. They had a process and a plan for current and future. They probably needed something to really manage those vendors, and they had a polling application, but they could probably add a link to source new and catchy polling questions, maybe trivia type stuff or something along those lines. So they could probably use some source information and connectors. So we have spent a lot of time talking about how we can help work groups become super productive, but we still have to manage our own work. We were hired to do something, our superpower, the stuff that fills up our to-do list, right? This cool little tip and trick on setting up your own personal productivity space will be maybe your answer. So with this idea, you can manage your to-do list, you can document your processes, you can manage your projects, and you can even just create a nice workspace that's creative for you. Let's take a look at an example. So in this case, we have Grady's private workspace. This is a team of one person. He doesn't have any other members or any other owners. He used his general channel to set up his to-do list, his quarterly event planning, and his learning and development process management pieces. So let's take a look. For his to-do list, he's using Planner, which is a good choice in some cases because he uses Planner for so many other things. So he can easily access all of his to-dos in one place. He also added a OneNote application to manage his events. And then he has this OneNote application to document his learning and development processes. So as you see here, we've got classroom delivery, even has this flow chart in there, and he has this virtual delivery management. Then he created 3 channels, one for each of the projects he's working on. So he has this marketing ideas, he has a group calendar, he has a connector in here, and he has a marketing plan. Then he has project management. So these are just all the projects he has, plus he has his needs analysis set up, which is in a forms. And then he has his reporting set up. He hasn't started this yet because that project's not up and running yet. But notice he has this nice, neat kind of matrixed approach to his projects and his to-do list. Now, a lot of people use Planner or OneNote or even Word or Excel to manage their to-do list, but you have other options. And you have other applications that you can use to do your work, and all of them are accessible here. So it's very robust. All right, let's go back to our deck for a minute. So where do you go from here? Today we talked about how to assess if your work group should best be set up as a team and channel or as a chat and meeting. We also reviewed how to create a dedicated workspace for your team, how to use a personal team for managing your own personal productivity, and we understood best practices in using teams. So, what's next? We'll definitely sign up for the next session in our curriculum. Learn tips for taking teams to the next level, part two. And jump right in by assessing your own team. Determine the best setup and include your team in on the approach and the architecture. Create a team and channel or a chat workspace and get started. Thank you so much for joining our session. Learn tips for taking teams to the next level, part one. Sign up for more classes, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.